Let me just make sure it's working. All right. I think we are live. Let me just make sure. Double check here. Guys, if anybody shows up in the live chat, please send us a comment or anything to show that we are live and streaming. Oh, yep, there we go. Okay, fantastic. All right, so this is Armin Navobi from Atheist Republic, and we are with...
Hey, my name is Landon Haynes. I'm an author with Atheist Republic.
Awesome. And what did you... What's the book? What's the book's name?
The book is called A Justified Faith. It's on the Atheist Republic website.
Yeah, but you could also get it on Amazon, right? Kindle.
Right, Amazon.
Yeah,
right.
And what is it about?
The book is about, it's called A Justified Faith. That refers to the overall progress of humanity, the overall development of humanity through history. The way I put it in the book is we've gone from cave dwellers to space explorers. And that overall trajectory of how we have advanced, to me, is an evidence-based, justified faith. If you want to call it faith, it's not. I guess it depends on how you want to define faith. We can get into that if you want. But
no,
just in contrast to religious faith, like if you want to pick a faith that's, justified, I would say that would be it.
Right. So today I noticed some of your comments on Facebook, and I noticed that you know quite a bit about the Enlightenment movement, right? The Enlightenment era.
Yeah.
And the reason why I wanted to talk to you about it is because of, I'm motivated to learn more about it more. I've been reading a bit about it, but I think you know more about it now. And the reason why I'm interested in it is because what Islam is going through right now, right? And because a lot of people seem to be comparing it with the Reformation or the Enlightenment movement and trying to learn from history. So I've been trying to learn from history and see what's happening, if there are any parallels. But independent from Islam, if you wanted to, before we start talking about the Enlightenment era, do you mind like telling the audience what we're talking about and what do people refer to when they're talking about the Enlightenment?
Enlightenment, yeah. Okay, so the Enlightenment refers mainly to the movement in the 18th century of basically free thinkers and their writings that kind of took off from the scientific revolution a century before that, in which they kind of shed their religious dogmatism, and the church kept losing authority and credibility. And we had, the American Revolution, and we had the French Revolution, which is really it's the womb of modernity, of like modern secular democracy and ideas about rights and separate from religion. And it was kind of like taking down the kings and the priests and their alliance that kept people in shackles, intellectually and in every way, really.
And what do you? Sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of echo. What do you think? What do you think is responsible for it starting?
I mean, I think there are many factors. You can go back to the Protestant Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
That really it kind of like demolished the absolute authority of the Catholic Church, and it splintered Christianity as we know. I can't even believe it, but I mean, it said there's like 10,000 sects of Christianity now. It's kind of crazy, but that started it, and just people realizing that they could think for themselves, even within the Christian sphere, the Christian world.
Right.
That they didn't have to take it from the authority, from the Pope, from the whoever makes the rules. Used to they would burn people for trying to read their own Bible, and most people had never even read the Bible. So, if you've heard of a guy named William Tyndale, he was burned because of it. There's many accounts like that.
Right. So a lot of people mention the Reformation movement before the Enlightenment movement, and when you look at the ideas that came out of the Reformation movement. They weren't at all close to what the Enlightenment movement produced. But the reason, correct me if I'm wrong, the reason why the Reformation movement eventually somewhat responsible is just the idea of dissent, right? The idea of, and the fact of removing the central authority, because a lot of the Protestants themselves are responsible for a lot of killing and burning and the witch burning, burning the witches.
Oh,
like
yeah.
it wasn't like the Reformation movement brought about the human rights movement or all the ideas that we recognize the Enlightenment movement era for. It's just the fact that
No.
the whole church got split into many different pieces, and the central authority went away, and also the idea of dissenting against authority became very popular. That's in that sense, it kind of helped the Enlightenment movement. Eventually, led into the Enlightenment movement. Is that accurate way to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd say so. Yeah. It's not that it's anything like the Enlightenment. It's just if you go back and try to retrace it, right? That's a big break that allowed the subsequent developments to follow.
Right.
So without that happening, it would have been pretty difficult, or at least it would have taken a lot more time and maybe a lot more bloodshed to be able to fight back against that that big huge monster that it was the Catholic Church that kind of controlled everything in Europe anyway.
Right. Is there but okay, so who are the main players and what was the general ideas that were becoming popular? And it seems like they were independent from each other across Europe. So it's weird that they all were happening at the same time. And it essentially started in Europe, but then, I mean, it came to the US a little bit later, right? I mean, there was the French Revolution that a lot of the founding fathers got inspired from, their constitution and all that stuff. But that was a little bit after, wasn't it?
Yeah, the French Revolution happened after the American Revolution.
No, sorry. I mean the French thinkers, the French thinkers that are responsible for the ideas behind the Constitution came before the people that in the United States. But also the writing of the Constitution of the United States, I thought it had something to do with the proposition that came from France. Wasn't it wasn't that part after?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you read the literature on it, a lot of times the American and the French thinkers knew each other. Like Benjamin Franklin, he spent a lot of time in France. He met Voltaire. He met David Hume, two big Enlightenment names. Thomas Jefferson lived in France, and he knew Condorcet, who was an atheist, and he was one of the big Enlightenment names in like the 1780s and 90s. So yeah, I mean, they knew each other, and I mean, it was like kind of across the Atlantic, kind of like a cycling of ideas that went on. Yeah, it happened in Europe first, no doubt. You go back to Voltaire. I'm sure you've heard of Voltaire.
Yeah, that's the name. Right? That's number one person people think about when they're thinking about the Enlightenment, right?
Yeah. If you read the book, the series of books called The Story of Civilization by Will and Ariel Durant, they were historians that were famous, or like wife and husband. And over I think 50 years, they wrote about 12
Is
books.
That the
one on the Enlightenment?
Isn't that the something civilization? Is that?
Yeah, the story of civilization. I think it's like 12
yeah.
of them, right?
Yeah, my mom had them.
So
my mom had them in Persian. Yeah.
Oh yeah, cool. The one on the Enlightenment in that series is called The Age of Voltaire.
So,
he's a big name. He wasn't an atheist.
Yeah, he was a deist. He was like a deist.
He said he was
like a deist, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was a deist pretty much.
I mean, even the founding.
He kind of railed against Christianity. Right. He hated cruelty, and he was a big advocate for rights and freedom of expression and religion and all that. No doubt. Thomas Jefferson had a bust of him in his home in Monticello. So yeah, definitely. David Hume, he died in 1776, the year that the American Revolution broke out. He met Benjamin Franklin. If you want to go the real atheist though, Hume was probably an atheist. He was a big skeptic. But if you want to find the actual atheist movement in the 1700s, and it's funny, Richard Dawkins says, it would have been really hard to be an atheist before Darwin. Well, they were there.
Yeah.
And really, their movement is what, really kickstarted modernity, like I said. But you go to France is where you need to go. So you need to go to these salons in France. The big guy, he was a really rich guy who held these philosophical get-togethers with like all the big names in Europe and America. His name was the Hobach, and for some reason you won't see him mentioned in a lot of like literature on the Enlightenment, or he'll be like a footnote. He was an atheist. He was he had like an underground network of atheist books and pamphlets that people wrote that he circulated throughout Europe. Thomas Jefferson did a critique of his biggest one called the System of Nature. And that's basically, that book stated, nature is everything. You can't go outside of nature. And that people that try to say there's something above or apart from nature, all they ever do is they use the ideas from within nature to, and project that outwardly. So he was a big one. Another one was Diderot, I think is how you say his name. He was like his best friend. And those guys were also big involved in the Encyclopedia, which was this monumental, unprecedented like encyclopedia. It was very scientific. And it really had a lot of slights against religion in it. And they composed that, I think at one point the church like banned it. But it was a big, huge undertaking, and they, it was just monumental. And the Hobach wrote a lot of scientific articles for that. And there were just a lot of those guys in France that really they were very atheistic and they're also, none of these guys that were atheists were like, like Stalin-esque or hedonist or anything. They were all about rights and freedoms, and they abhorred cruelty and war, and they saw religion, and they saw like, the alliance of kings and priests as being like forever keeping mankind in shackles, and not being able to achieve their potential, and humanity being able to achieve its potential.
So they were against religion for the same reason they were against monarchs. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. Okay. In big part, yeah.
And some people in the live chat are mentioning Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. Was that be?
Yeah.
Dennis.
Well.
Well, I don't know. Some of these names are hard to pronounce. I wish I knew more of these.
I'm not sure you pronounce his name either. Dennis Diderot. Yeah. I mentioned him. Yeah, him and the Hobach were like best friends.
Oh yeah, he mentioned that as well.
Say that he wrote some people say he wrote parts of the System of Nature, like the more like really poetic parts. He was like a poet.
Thomas Jefferson. So, they say in the live chat they're mentioning that cutting the Bible in pieces, taking the bad parts out. Like, I mean, these. It was very. It would be very fair to say. Okay, so the general theme is pro-human rights, pro-science, pro-freedom, pro-individual rights, pro-due process, right?
Absolutely.
Anti-monarch and anti-religion. That's the general theme. Is that right?
I'd say so.
Okay. Yeah. But the anti-religion part of it is undeniable. Like, it's not like they weren't trying to, tiptoe around religious sentiments. They were not. They were
No. Well, in America, with the founding fathers, they were a little bit, because they were politicians. So like most of Jefferson's stuff that's really against religion, a lot of it is in his private notes, which are like a treasure trove for like free thinkers. I mean, because he bashed the Bible, he bashed every aspect of Christianity almost, except the moral precepts of Jesus. But even he said like a lot of what was written by his biographers, he called them, in the Gospels, were like, it was like he thought a lot of that was fabrications by his later followers. I mean, he called Paul a corrupter of the doctrines of Jesus. Said that he what do you call him? I think he called him an idiot or stupid or something. I can't remember, but he was dissing Paul. And he was just everybody throughout history, just about. And he said basically, if you read the Gospels, you can pick out the diamonds of Jesus, his moral precepts, from the dunghill that it's buried in. It's his words. And he talked about like people in America wanted to like be able to put the torch to the pile and rekindle in this virgin hemisphere the fires that from the Inquisition and the Crusades, etc. I mean, so these guys, the American founders, the main ones, they were really like students of history. I mean, they were well versed in philosophy and science, history. It's really impressive if you read their material, and I could recommend some books that are great source material for that.
What are some books?
I mean, they're really inspiring when you read them.
What are some books?
All right, so one is the separation of church and hold up, what it's called. Jefferson and Madison on the separation of church and state. It's edited by Levi Brenner, I believe it is. It has everything that James Madison or Thomas Jefferson ever wrote about religion or church-state separation. Every single letter. It has the Jefferson Bible in it. It's a great, great book. Another one is Ye Will Say I Am No Christian, the Thomas Jefferson, John Adams correspondence on religion, morals, and philosophy. I think it's edited by Braden, Bradn. It's another one. I mean, there's many I can mention if you want to go through them.
How was it so, like, what was it unusual for people to be anti-religion? Like, how did they just, like, it seems like it just came out of, I mean.
It didn't come out of nowhere, though. Because if you go back to the scientific revolution, you have people like Francis Bacon, who some people call the father of science, or the scientific method. And he had to be a lot more careful, but you'll see it in his writings, kind of the doubting, the dogmatism and the doctrine of the church. If you've heard of Spinoza, he was a biblical critic. He kind of criticized the Bible, and he was a determinist. He was what they call a pantheist. He basically saw God as nature.
Yeah, pantheist is Richard Dawkins calls pantheists sexed up atheists because they don't believe in they don't believe in a conscious God. They just relabel things that already exist as God, right?
Yeah, that's fair enough. Einstein was kind of like that.
Einstein was like that, but then he regretted doing it because he saw people making it seem like he believes in a personal God, and he wrote in his God letter that I do not believe in a personal God. Like that was the only thing I called religion.
He was a smart dude, right? He was a smart dude, right? So I don't know why he used God all the time if he didn't really believe in any kind of God.
No, because it's poetic. They just call science things in nature and science. They refer to it as God, and then they see the effect of it. So even Stephen Hawking used to do that, right? Stephen Hawking at some point used the word God for like science and nature, but then he saw that people are actually using that. So he came out and I don't believe in any God. Like I mean,
at the end of his book, Brief History of Time. He says, and then we will know the mind of God. And then later, he had to clarify, I meant that if there were a God, we would know what his mind is.
Yeah.
He declared himself an atheist, outright.
Yeah. So. I mean, it's kind of like saying the sky is crying, it's not crying. You're just saying rain in a poetic way. Using the word God in a poetic way, it's actually kind of interesting if it didn't start create so much confusion and people actually taking advantage of it to make smart people sound like theists. I would understand that, but the problem is that it gets misused. So a lot of people mention that a lot of Christians or even many atheists that are sympathetic to Christianity or are afraid of Islam creeping, and they want to they try to use Christianity as a tool against Islam, even though they're not Christians themselves. One thing that I hear more and more is that Christianity is the foundation of Western values, and when they say Western values, I think they're referring to Enlightenment values, like the idea of human rights, the idea of free speech, and I always like. And I'm always like, where in the Bible are you getting this from? And they're like, no, these are Christian.
Hey, can I talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the first commandment?
Thou shalt not worship other gods.
What's the First Amendment?
Oh, the free speech. Yeah, free speech. It's a bit.
You can't. Yeah, freedom of religion.
Wait, that's the first one.
There should be no law respecting an establishment of religion.
Wait, what's the...
And earlier in the Constitution, there's no religious test can be ordered to hold office. So I mean, the point is they're in direct contradiction.
Yeah.
That's just one.
Actually, that's a very good example. That's a very good way of putting that.
Yeah, you know, you've heard of the Dark Ages, of course.
Oh yeah,
who reigned over that?
Yeah, okay.
Who reigned over the Dark Ages?
What
religion reigned over the Dark
Christians.
Ages? There you go.
Wait.
For 1,000 years.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but the free speech, the First Amendment is also about free speech, free exercise of religion, freedom of the press. Yeah, actually, the first 3 commandments of the Bible are about not worshiping other gods, which actually kind of makes it seem like there are other gods.
Yeah.
Not have.
There were.
Yeah.
They thought there were. You go back.
Yeah, not saying the Lord's name in vain, which is also against free speech. Not having God's image anywhere, which is against every Catholic church out there.
Yeah.
Actually, this is something I don't understand. Doesn't every Catholic church have a Jesus, which is basically engraving the image of God? Like, isn't that against the Ten Commandments?
Yeah, we have to realize the Catholics and Protestants, they went to war and they decimated Europe. They killed each other. They slaughtered each other. I mean, from what I read, they completely decimated Germany, you know, and like they left it in ashes. I mean, it's funny, you know, you have the word of God, right? But
right. But somebody in live chat is saying Stephen Hawking's peace be upon him. Yeah, sorry, we should have said peace be upon him. And somebody in the live chat is Brian in the live chat is saying Stephen Hawking was a robot used by the Jews for world domination. I think that's
oh, wow.
No, that's a joke. But yeah. So, and the thing is that what is would you give credit to the Enlightenment movement for why Christianity right now is not as I mean, it still influences people's lives in many different ways in North America and in Europe, and also in South America and Philippines and many other countries, but it's not at all close to empower as it used to be. That's accurate, right? Like, it's not even close to with the position that it used to have, right?
No, nowhere close.
It was
nowhere close.
So
it's not even a different universe,
right?
I mean, you have to understand, Christianity controlled everything. It was the law. It was everything with your family. It was everywhere. It was everything. That's all that mattered. I mean, that it consumed life, right? It's completely different now.
Right.
The main thing is Christianity doesn't have power. It doesn't have political power. It doesn't control the state, right? We have a separation of church and state.
Right, but it used to in such a big way. Like like you couldn't be king without the Pope's blessing, right?
Pretty much.
Until King Henry, actually. But
I just saw in Spain, the new prime minister of Spain is an atheist.
Right.
I forget his name, but I think the president of Uruguay is an atheist.
Right.
You have several, you know, in several countries, political leaders can be atheists or non-theists.
Yeah. Would you say that it?
Mainly America.
So So a lot of people give credit to the fact that the Christianity is not in power anymore to the Reformation, right? But the thing is that even after the Reformation, you needed a church to give authority to the king. Like you had in England, you had the Church of England. You still religion was still in power in much more than it was after the Enlightenment movement. Would you think that it was the Enlightenment movement that made religion take a back seat to everything?
I'd say mainly. Yeah.
And the thing is, like, a lot of people like compare Christianity to Islam, and they suggest that Christianity, by its nature, cannot be as political as Islam. But if you go look at Christianity when you're talking about, you're saying how much in control it was. Would it be comparable to how political Islam is today? Was it more in power, less in power, the same? If it's even comparable?
I'd say it was more. Christianity was more in
More in
control
control.
because
Yeah.
yes, because as bad as it is in some Islamic countries, right, they still live in the modern world, even if they're isolated from it. They can still see it if they really look for it, even if they put themselves in danger. We have the internet, now all people got to do is really look around, even if they might be dangerous. Then there was just no alternatives. There was no, people hadn't really that much discovered like other, they hadn't discovered like the Western Hemisphere to like the 1500s, right?
Right.
1492 and on. And the scientific revolution was pretty new still. The century before, I mean, there were just far less alternatives, and that worldview, the secular worldview, didn't really exist. It's just completely different now. If you're comparing modern Islam or Islamic countries to, Christendom, Europe, 500 years ago.
One thing people say often is that they need a Reformation. What Christianity had for Reformation, we need one of that for Islam. And what I usually say is like, that's not what you need. You need what the Enlightenment movement, right? And the thing is that if you suggest that, well, the Reformation paved the way for the Enlightenment movement, what the Reformation did was made sure that Christianity doesn't have a central authority and cut it into pieces, right? The thing is that with Islam, you never had that central authority to begin with. It was already cut in pieces, right? So you don't need a process of cutting it into pieces, right? Like the amount of central authority that the Catholic Church enjoyed, there was never a single Pope of Islam that united all the Islamic community together. So that issue was never there. And if you look at what the Reformation was asking Christians to do, it was like to look at the Bible directly, not go through the priests, read it yourself, and just be true to the Bible without actually going through the priest. And Islam did have that movement, and that's called the Wahhabi movement in Islam, because you don't want that actually for Islam. People going to the book and taking the book literally and following that's a bad advice for Islam, right? So the Martin Luthers of Islam are the Wahhabis. We don't need Martin Luthers. We need what I tell them is that we need more Voltaires in Islam, not people like Martin Luther. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
Okay.
I don't mean to credit the Reformation for the values of the Enlightenment or anything else. All I mean is like, if you go back and you try to look for retrace it back, right, and you try to look for the events that enabled subsequent things to happen, that was a big one. Just what you said, to shed into pieces, smash into pieces the huge entity that was the Catholic Church.
Right.
Values, not really.
Yeah, I mean, from Islam, from its very beginning, it had its own main opposition from the very beginning, and then even the Sunni Khalifa. At some point, there was 3 Khalifas all across the Islamic world, right? All saying that they're the true Khalifa. It was already going in different directions from the very start, so that issue was already there. But so would it be like a lot of people? Would it be too? Are we being absolutists by saying there's absolutely not a single thing in the Bible that is responsible for Western values? Like people say, and we're giving all the credit to the Enlightenment movement. Like people say, what about the Golden Rule? What about give unto Caesar what is due? So it's suggesting that Christianity is not as political. It's letting you know that wherever you are, obey the people in power. What about these rules? Are these rules not responsible for modern Western values?
Responsible? I don't think so. The Golden Rule, as I'm sure you know, is ancient.
Yep.
And ubiquitous. You can find it everywhere throughout history. You can find it in just about any religion.
Wasn't it already in Hammurabi, like on no, that's an eye for
had the Hammurabi
yeah,
Code.
that was eye for an eye. That's where it came from.
That was in Babylon. That came before the Mosaic, Ten Commandments. So yeah, a lot of people think if you watch like documentaries or read books about it, think that had an influence on the Ten Commandments, as well as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Actually,
right.
There's some similarities there that people think that there was some influence.
And these influences that on the Bible, these are not actually the good influences. What I tell people is that a lot of people think that the Bible introduced a whole bunch of moral code that was good for humanity, even if it's fake. I tell them that's not true. Like it had a lot of hand cutting. Like it tells you to cut the hand of your wife if she tries to protect you. In a fighting against another man, if she goes and grabs the other man's balls, you have to cut her hands off. Like I don't know, like, and they tell you that it tells you that you have to stone a woman in front of her father's house if she commits adultery. Even Jesus even in the New Testament tells you to go kill people that don't consider him king. So and thousands of years before the Bible, there were Greek philosophers talked about ethics and morality in a much more detailed and nuanced ways. I mean,
that's another point you might could go to is the ancient Greeks. Right. A lot of them, Democritus, Epicurus, Protagoras, a lot of these guys, the Ionians generally, they were very like humanistic. They weren't very gaudy guys. They were really into like focusing on this world and studying things almost scientifically. Carl Sagan in his book, The Demon Haunted World, he said, I can remember what he said. Basically that science and democracy started at the same time and place in ancient Greece with the Ionians, who were very empiricist. They were very empirical. And I think he's pretty much right about that. I mean, at least in some form. You had a lot of thinkers that really, like Plato was very mystical. I'm sure you've heard of like the cave analogy where he said like, like we're like tied to looking at the wall of a cave, seeing shadows, and the real world is like behind us and we can't see it. And it's like everything like on Earth is like a reflection of perfect forms that exist in like some higher realm. And Christianity, from what I've read, really took off with that kind of mysticism, Platonic mysticism. But there were a lot of thinkers in ancient Greece that
right.
really,
I mean,
almost like forerunners to the Enlightenment, really.
Yeah, and actually, you could give credit to the Arab Empire for translating a whole bunch of that stuff, and so the Arab Empire is somehow responsible for making sure these are, and that has nothing to do with Islam. That was just Arabs translating stuff. But the the Greek philosophers, they had, even when they were wrong, the point was that their ideas came from discussing things and logically thinking about things. Some of them was good, some of them bad. They contradicted each other. They disagreed.
Some of them were very bad. Some of them were really funny. The ideas.
Right, but the thing.
I mean, if you read Aristotle, like some of his stuff was like insane.
Yeah, but I mean, it was insane. But it was never I'm right because of divine authority. Right, you had to. It was always judge it based on what I'm saying. These are my reasons for it. Some of the reasoning was bad. Some of the reasoning was good. It was never I'm right.
They were reasoning.
Yes, they were reasoning
based on observation and rationality.
Right. Some people that are late in the chat are saying, "Who am I chatting with? Can you introduce yourself again and mention again your book?" I'm gonna put put a link into your book in the description of this video once we're off. But go, yeah.
All right, so again, my name is Landon Haynes. I'm an author with Atheist Republic. I have a couple of blogs. So one of them is Jesus and Thomas Jefferson, which is it's published last November, I think. My book is A Justified Faith. It's very much kind of like Steven Pinker-esque, and like the overall evolution of humanity. Like I said before, we'd gone from cave dwellers to space explorers. And that's like amazing, and we know that. And like God is like a dubious hypothesis for the universe. So yeah.
So Theo Theo, I'm just going to say Theo for short because I can't pronounce the whole thing. Theo is saying you should talk about Voltaire's play about Muhammad. Do you know what that's about?
Actually, I've never heard about
Yeah,
that.
we should look into that. That's pretty interesting. And
All
another
right.
thing Theo is mentioning is Jesus. Oh, yeah. And one thing that people say about Christianity is that family values come from Christianity. And
Jesus told people to abandon
yeah,
their
yeah. Actually,
families.
Theo is mentioning that
He was a go leader.
Luke 14:26 mentioned Jesus mentioned you that you should love him above. You should hate your family, right?
Yeah,
So I don't
yeah.
understand what the family values come from. I mean, people say,
There's so much shit in the Bible. You and I know
yeah.
that.
I mean, people that say this the unit of family came from Christianity, from the New Testament. Well, I mean, where? I don't understand. You're talking about virgin birth. You're talking about the Old Testament. You had daughters raping their father. Um, you had God, turning the mother of a family into salt just because she dared to look back at the city.
Some people say Yahweh, he stopped Abraham from killing Isaac, right?
Right.
He didn't, excuse all the child trauma and all the value that what matters is obedience and not human
Right.
life, right?
Right.
That's
Yeah,
what matters.
that's
That's
a
very
good
much.
point. Yeah, human life.
But
Human life means if you hear voices in your head telling you to kill your son,
yeah,
you should follow it.
people get locked up now if they hear people, voices tell them to kill their
Yeah,
kids,
yeah, yeah.
right?
That's not
But if you go to Numbers, I think Numbers 11, God was perfectly fine. Yahweh was fine with I think the general's name is Jephthah. Dawkins talks about this in the God Delusion. His little girl was sacrificed to Yahweh, and Yahweh accepted it, right? I forget the exact context. I think it was like the next thing that would come out of his house, if God would let him win a victory, would be sacrificed to Yahweh. And his little girl came out.
Oh yeah.
And so he proceeded to sacrifice his little girl like an animal.
Right.
To Yahweh, and Yahweh didn't stop it this time.
Yeah, well, he will stop you if you look back at a city. He will turn you into salt. But if you sacrifice little children or rape your father,
Yeah.
he will not. He will. That's okay. I mean, yeah. The no, but where do you think that comes from? Like even atheists are saying that though. I mean, people like Doug Murray is saying he says like there is something to Christianity. Where do you think human rights came from? And
it came from the Enlightenment.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying.
They came from the
Enlightenment, but
that language didn't exist before the Enlightenment. It's not in the Bible.
Right. But where do you
if you read Adam Smith, you read Montesquieu, you read Voltaire, you read David Hume, you read gosh, there's so many of them. You should provide links to some books with this video. People need to read about this stuff.
You write a book about the Enlightenment. I will just link to that every time.
In my book, A Justified Faith, chapter 8 is on theocracy, the problem of theocracy, and I talk a lot about the Enlightenment in that
okay
chapter.
Sweet. So. But what do you think? Why do you think people even atheists think that? Like, where is the source of the confusion?
I think religion has been it's been the only ticket in town. It dominated everything, and that is where people there wasn't an alternative, right?
Right.
I mean, until recently, the last couple hundred years, there was no alternative. And there are good things to be found in the Bible. I would hope there's some good things, because for how long it's lasted, right? And for as many people that have believed in it, I would hope there's some good things. What I
tell people is that it would be miraculous to write a book that long and not have a single good advice in it. Like they would have to be divinely inspired for you to be able to write that much nonsense without having.
But I mean, it makes sense, right? It's man-made. Right. It's like kind of a mix of good and bad. Like a lot of things humans have thought up, like politics and marriage and all kinds of things you could say, or maybe have some downsides or some good sides, some pluses, right?
Yeah,
it's man-made, and it looks that way.
Yeah, but then people say, then why can't you just use religion and keep the good and throw away the bad? I mean, like, but if you're judging which part of it is good and which part of it is bad, then you're not really, then religion is not doing much for you, right? Like that.
Yeah, you're bringing that judgment to
Right.
it. You're not getting it from
But
it. Where are you getting that criteria, that internal criteria?
Right.
You're getting it from modernity, from a world shaped by the Enlightenment.
Yeah, exactly.
Mainly.
And the fact is that you're doing two things. First of all, you're judging it on your based on your own values, which came from the Enlightenment. But you're also, by giving credit to the religion for it, you're basically providing cover for it to be able to make excuses for the other parts of it which are harmful. Yeah. Right.
And that's a big thing. How divisive religion is. Like it says in the holy text, right? People of other faiths are going to burn forever, right? I mean, this kind of stuff is just anathema to unity, to peace, to
Right.
So people, they keep having to reinterpret it and cherry pick it, and this is part of why I think it keeps losing power and credibility. And we still have plenty of people that are really into it, right? But it's just like I said before, it's nothing compared to how it used to be. I mean, used to be you could not find any atheists, right? Or hardly any. I mean, I think the number of atheists in the world have, I don't know how many times they've quadrupled, and however far you can go, like I don't know how many times, 20, 50 times more than there were in the last 100 years. It's insane.
Yeah.
I mean,
so then what do you tell people that are saying that, look, religion is too useful for it to go anywhere? Like I even heard in a recent podcast on Penguin Philosophy with Brett Weinstein, the latest episode number 9 is in Travis Penguin and Brett Weinstein. He argues that you don't want to get rid of religion right away. There's too much. There must be too much utility to it. It's around for a reason. There must be some usefulness to it, right? How would you respond to that?
I don't really buy that. I mean, you don't want to force people to do anything, right? You don't want to be like communist, like Soviet Union, and try to force people to give things like that up. Right?
Yeah.
And you certainly don't want to replace it with a secular political religion like Stalinism. That's has the worst aspects of traditional religion, like heresy hunts and all kinds of craziness. But I think that, I don't know, it's a tough question. I mean, it's been around for a while, and it has a lot to say about society. And
but what I say is, so has slavery, right? So has slavery been around for forever, and again, and whenever I say that, people say, well, slavery is still around. Yes, I know slavery is still around, but in many places it existed for thousands of years, and nobody could imagine it not being there. And in many countries, within few years it just disappeared, and we survived. We survived without it, right? And I understand. Yes, there are examples of many places on the planet that there's still slavery, but in areas where we managed to get rid of it, we survived. And people could make the same arguments about slavery. Well, there's some utility to it. It wouldn't, if it wasn't useful, it wouldn't last this long, right? And
a lot of things have lasted a long time that are awful,
right? Yeah, lasting long. That's not a good argument for why it should stay around. And even in the places that slavery is still a thing, we should do whatever we can to get rid of it ASAP. We shouldn't slow down the progress of getting rid of it because there's some utility into it, or we think there might be some good in it. Because no, fuck that, right? Yeah, I think there's a name for that fallacy. That things that have lasted for a long time must be good, but I don't know what it is. I forgot the name of the fallacy.
But if you think about that point, though, that is kind of mind blowing. Slavery was everywhere; it was ubiquitous. Since time immemorial, it's ancient.
Yeah.
Right. And now it's pretty much illegal everywhere in the world.
Well, not everywhere, but yeah.
Some little pockets. Well, yeah, but it might be some little pockets. But for the most part, I mean. We had the universal, I can't remember the name of it. After World War II, 1945-7, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, like so many countries signed that.
Right.
That was an Enlightenment product, if there ever was one, talking about rights and everybody, having equal rights and freedoms and things of that nature.
Yeah, and it was a radical suggestion. Like for when people came out and say that slavery shouldn't be a thing, it wasn't like people were already saying that and building up on it. This was like a radical new suggestion. Like people were like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Like, how could we not have slaves?" Right? Like the whole world is built on the back of slaves.
Yeah, man. Even you go to something like Thomas Jefferson, like in so many ways, what an icon, like for democracy and rationality. But the man owned slaves, right?
Right. Oh, somebody's naming exponent is naming the fallacy argument from antiquity. Thank you. That's a logical fallacy, or conservatism. Okay.
So I have a couple of quotes here if you like to hear them.
Before we do that, Hello is pointing out to us that Africans to this day are being kept by as slaves by Muslims, and other people as well. I mean, if you consider China's prisons, there's labor in prison, so I mean they're not getting paid. So I guess Chinese prisons are slave, and there's lots of slaves there. But yeah, go on.
Okay. See here. So this is from The System of Nature by Baron de Holbach. It says, men will always deceive themselves by abandoning experience to follow imaginary systems. The beings which he pictures to himself as above nature or distinguished from her are always chimeras formed after that which he has already seen. There can be nothing out of that nature which includes all beings.
Right.
Which is just basically saying like the universe, if you're going to say God, why not the universe? The universe is simpler. We know it exists. We know it can be self-existent and self-producing. When he says nature, he's talking about the universe, not, like flowers and trees. He's talking about everything.
But that quote is so great because I always, when people mention about supernatural, I always get confused. What are we talking about? What is supernatural? Is supernatural like if it exists, okay, wouldn't that make it like part of nature? Like, isn't that?
Yeah, I mean, it could be just like a part of nature we haven't like figured out or seen yet.
But that would make it natural. Like, I don't understand. Like, like I think it's like nature. Like what? Just because we don't understand something. Okay, so supernatural. You're saying supernatural is things that exist. It has some certain rules about it. Like it works in a certain way. Well, it's just that makes it just part of nature that we haven't figured out yet. Like it's still nature. Like I really don't understand the idea of what separates the people that believe in supernatural. I never managed to get them to explain to me what separates supernatural from natural, because if it exists, then it's part of nature. But I think this quote is that you read is that's what it's getting to, I think. Yeah.
You were asking about like what are the factors that led to like modernity and like the Enlightenment principles and things like that. I have a good quote from what I mentioned earlier, Will and Ariel Durant, from one of their books. This is called The Lessons of History. It's their book where they summarize like all the lessons they noticed from doing history for 50 years. So and it talks about religion, like why religion declined and their ideas of why that happened. So I can read that to you real quick if you like.
Yeah.
All right. So man's growing awareness of his minuscule place in the cosmos has furthered the impairment to religious belief. The Protestant Reformation broke the hegemony of the church and saw a multitude of sects with conflicting theologies. The higher criticism of the Bible showed it to be the imperfect work of fallible men. Deism reduced religion to a vague belief in a God hardly distinguishable from nature. Acquaintance with other religions, many pre-Christian, which were distressingly similar to the supposedly factual basis of one's inherited creed. There was a Protestant exposure of Catholic miracles, the deistic exposure of biblical miracles, the general exposure of frauds, inquisitions, and massacres in the history of religion. Finally, the awesome triumphs of scientific technology promise man omnipotence and challenge the divine command of the skies. The Christian ethic could no longer stomach the vengeful God of traditional theology, just as the moral development of the Hellenes had weakened their belief in the quarrelsome deities of Olympus.
Yeah.
So there's, in short, some of the factors that what went on.
Very anti-religious. Here's so going back to when I mentioned Brett Weinstein talking about not getting rid of religion too fast, or if we get rid of it, what would we replace it with? I mean, I think there's some Enlightenment quotes regarding actually that was Dan Barker. He mentioned that asking what if there is no God, what master, if there is no God, who would I worship? Is kind of like saying if there is no master, whose slave would I be, right? And dramatic changes happen in history all the time, and people move on, and sometimes they're better for it, even if it happens very fast. But you actually you slightly touched something that is actually very important. You're saying we're not forcing. It's not like we're just going and stealing people's religion away from them, right? Like, what do you mean? Like,
I think we should learn from history, right? I mean, we have one great thing now is we have so much history recorded, and we can learn from it, right? We can learn from the mistakes of the past, and we know that like forcing people to just like give up their cultural beliefs, it's not going to go over too well. By force.
Yes. No, what we're doing is we're inviting people to reconsider, and if it happens fast, it will happen fast. If it happens slow, it happens slow. We're just trying to. We don't really get to decide that much how fast it goes. We're just putting the option out there. Like, I really don't understand when people complain to atheists, "Oh, you can't get rid of religion because."
Well, atheists and non-believers, they tend to advocate for secularism, which is about fairness, right? It's about keeping things fair and equal under the law. Like, no one religion can like take control of the government, like force people to be one religion or not, or persecute them. And that's the principle of secularism. Right?
If and we think that we're not against Christians advocating for Christianity, we're not against Muslims advocating for Islam, but we're saying as long as they're doing it, there should be atheists also providing an option for people if they want to consider not doing any of those, right? I mean, and when you mentioned like we don't support secular like tyrannies, like communist regimes and stuff like that, a lot of people think that because we're against religion, anything without religion we accept. No, we're against religion and many other bad ideas, right? Like it doesn't matter if it's without religion. If it's a government without religion that is not following human rights, freedom of speech, due process, all of that, we're against that as well. Just because we're not in love with anything just because it doesn't have religion in it. Like, that's a very. But yeah, I mean, the reason why we're against religion sometimes is also the reason why we're against these other bad ideas, right? Like, we don't like the fact. We don't like religious teachings that are against human rights. So if there are any other teachings that are also against human rights, even if it comes from atheist regimes, we will be against that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. But for those Americans that want to talk about, America's a Christian nation, there's so many reasons why that's bullshit. Yeah. But I know quotes tend to bore viewers, right? But I have one just golden quote, like from Thomas Jefferson, like if I could like shoot it off real quick. It gets into a lot of like his thoughts on Christianity. You may or may not have heard of it. If you want me to shoot that,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. You know who Epicurus is, right? The ancient Greek philosopher, like a known atheist. All right, so this is from Thomas Jefferson to William Short.
Isn't that the guy that said, "Why should I fear death? Because when I was I was already dead for thousands of years before I was born, something like that. Right. So I was fine back then. I will be fine back after as well, right? Oh no.
Yeah, he was commonly
okay. Sorry.
He was commonly thought an atheist all through
Sorry,
history.
sorry. Let me actually correct that before you say the quote. He said like, if there, why should I fear death? Because if there is death, I would be not. If I am, death is not. So there's never a situation where death and I am existing at the same time. So how could I fear?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, something like that. Yeah.
He was also the one that I don't know if I can remember it exactly. It went like, if God is just,
Oh
why is there
yeah, was that
suffering?
him?
I can't remember how it goes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you know what I'm talking
Yeah, I
about.
know. Vision.
But anyway, this Jefferson quote. I'll get back to it. Okay, so you can look it up. Thomas Jefferson to William Short, October 31st, 1819. As you say of yourself, I too am an Epicurean. I consider the genuine doctrines of Epicurus as containing everything rational and moral philosophy which Greece and Rome have left us. But the greatest of all the reformers of the depraved religion of his own country was Jesus of Nazareth, abstracting what is really his from the rubbish in which it is buried, easily distinguished by its luster from the dross of his biographers, the gospel writers, and as separable from that as a diamond from the dunghill. The establishment of the innocent and genuine character of this benevolent moralist and the rescuing of it from the imputation of imposture, which have resulted from artificial systems, e.g., the immaculate conception of Jesus, his deification, the creation of the world by him, his miraculous, his miraculous powers, his resurrection and visible ascension, his corporeal presence in the Eucharist, the Trinity, original sin, atonement, regeneration, election, orders of hierarchy, etc., invented by ultra-Christian sects, unauthorized by a single word ever uttered by him, is a most desirable object. It would in time, it is to be hoped, affect the quiet euthanasia of the heresies of bigotry and fanaticism, which have so long triumphed over human reason, and so generally and deeply afflicted mankind. And he goes on later in the letter to talk about Condorcet, who was a French Enlightenment writer who was an atheist, who he had a bust of, and he was talking about it's a shame how he got killed in the French Revolution, and went on about him. But I mean, that's just I love that letter. That has, he basically, if you notice there, every single doctrine of Christianity, he basically said is an invention of later writers. That's not real. Resurrection, the miraculous birth, original sin, all of it.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of these, some of these people kind of suggest like Jesus was kind of cool, but other people changed them. I really don't know how they know how Jesus was, because he's later everything we know about Jesus is about these people.
And even Thomas Jefferson, he constantly talks about like everything. Most of what's in the Bible is garbage, basically, and even the Gospels.
So, yeah,
and he says even some of the things that the Gospel writers put in his mouth are garbage. So how did Jefferson know what he really said?
Like they say, like, oh, Jesus was cool, but people kind of change his words. The Bible is bullshit. Like, okay, then how do you know what Jesus?
If you really
like,
dig in there, you can find
this
it.
Is all this text,
and I know what it is.
I mean, all this text that we have is the only thing we have that we know. If Jesus was real, then we have no idea what he said. This is the only text. He might have been an asshole. We don't know. But Theo is mentioning in the live chat that Judeo-Christian values doesn't make sense. Judaism. First he says Judeo-Christian values is a conservative propaganda term used to take credit for secular Enlightenment accomplishments. Exactly. And then he continues in saying Judeo-Christian values doesn't make sense. Judaism is Judaism because it's not Christianity, and Christianity is not Christianity because it's Judaism. Yeah. I mean, the two books are very different from each other, so I don't even understand how people can link them with each other. The Old Testament, no. I mean, it's two completely different books. The only thing connects them is that one of them refers to the other one sometimes. And then Theo mentions that if you want to talk about the relationship of Judaism and Christianity, you need to say Abrahamic. Yeah, is the Judeo-Christian, that term was invented recently, hasn't it? Because he said the reason American conservatives conservatives don't want to do that, they don't want to say Abrahamic, is because it also that term also includes Islam. I think that's the reason. Yeah, but yeah. So, but yeah, I agree. Like Judeo-Christian values. I mean, a lot of people also a lot of times when we talk about the barbarism in the Old Testament, people mention how we're talking about the New Testament, but the New Testament is not any better. The New Testament, first of all, the New Testament is the book that Jesus says, I didn't come to bring you peace, right? I came to bring war, right?
Yeah. To bring
He tells you to kill people that don't consider him king. He tells you to hate your family. He curses a tree because it didn't have fruits for him. Like that's the New Testament. And also the New Testament is much worse than the Old Testament because it's actually the most sadistic book of all. It's the book that is responsible for the idea of hell, everlasting punishment in hell, right? Like that's.
Well, I don't think they invented the idea of of punishment in the afterlife, but eternal torture and flames. I think that was pretty much
the idea of punishment in the afterlife, I think it goes back to Zoroastrianism. They came up with that, I think. I mean, Zoroastrians? It's an ancient Persian religion.
I know about Zoroastrianism. And actually, that religion influenced Judaism, actually.
Yeah, well, and actually, well, Jews started talking about afterlife after they came in contact with Zoroastrians, right? But so I mean, this is all speculation.
And Sheol, Sheol was like this vague afterlife. Sheol, I think.
I don't know. But I mean,
if you read Ecclesiastes, it's like there's no afterlife at all.
Yes, but some Jews do mention it a bit, but most of them don't have this. There's no text for it. But Christians went with that, and Muslims copied them, right? So, but yeah, I don't think it might be true that New Testament was the first one that mentioned that it was everlasting. I don't know actually, but that's pretty that's pretty sadistic, I think. I don't even in the Old Testament.
You read the Book of Revelation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even in the Old.
Go back to Thomas Jefferson. He has a quote. He has this friend of his that's talking about reading the Book of Revelation, and he basically tells him look, I don't think this is worth your time. You have a dignity and intelligence that's above even trying to excuse this book. And he said, what is the quote that he said? He said it's not the Book of Revelation is not it's like your nightly dreams. It's no more worthy or capable of explanation than your nightly dreams. And he called it the ravings of a maniac.
Yeah, or some people, a lot of people that read it, they after reading it, they say this person must have been high. Have you read Book of Revelation? It's pretty.
I know there's multi-headed monsters.
Yeah, I've read the entire thing. It's actually pretty funny. What it reminds me of. You know how children when they're drawing monsters, then they a sword. They put a sword coming out of his mouth, and they put 7 heads. He has 10 claws and 7 heads. And
some people think he was a guy that was writing after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. That covered Pompeii and ash. You seen about that, where they have the bodies that are preserved,
right?
From the positions when they died. It was in 70 AD. And they think that he was a writer that was writing around that time after that happened, in the aftermath of it, of that volcano erupting.
Right. And
possible.
Yeah, but here, I want to make this point. I remember in kindergarten when we drew we wanted to draw badass stuff. We would put guns in for arms and bullets coming out of someone else's mouth. This is how a child minds work. I really do think whoever wrote that, it seems like a very, I don't know who wrote that, but it seems very childish. But
very mythological.
What?
It's very mythological.
It's not actually. Actually, a lot of the mythology they're good. They're good. If you read, I don't know, Iliad or whatever, they're pretty good. They don't have swords coming out of people's mouths as weapons. I think that's childish kind of mythology. I don't know. I mean, a lot of them. I mean, I don't know the story of having, chaining a demigod as and then this bird comes and it comes and like punishes it because he stole the fire from the gods for people and gets punished by a bird that comes and I don't know, I think it cuts out the liver every time and then it grows back. Or the stories of, I don't know, these stories, like, they're like made up, but they're like, wow, that's interesting, right? I mean, Hercules and these are all interesting stories. I mean, whoever wrote them, like, wow, nicely done. I mean, it's not real, but it's good. I think some of them, but
I like mythology.
Yeah, but the Book of Revelation is just random nonsense. I think I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know, but
pretty cruel too.
Yeah, pretty cruel too.
It's pretty nasty.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it makes it fun though because it's so random. It's just like it's good to like sit around with friends and read them. I don't know. It's just crazy.
Yeah, you ever read Joseph Campbell?
No.
He was a big like mythological expert. He wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is like comparative religion, comparative mythology, and he compares a lot of religions, and also his series The Masks of God, and he has one volume of it is on Western mythology, Occidental mythology, and it talks about like the origins of Christianity and Judaism and a lot of those religions. Not really Western, but I guess they became Western, right?
Right.
They're kind of like Oriental.
Another point that we mentioned, I think, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth is also a bad idea. Somebody, so that comes from the Bible, right? Somebody mentioned that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. That's and also the golden rule, which is something that whenever you mention, when the two top examples when people talk about Western values and Christianity, the two main examples that people bring is the golden rule and the fact that give to Caesar what is due. I mean, these are the two examples. So the golden rule is also bullshit because you shouldn't judge what other people want based on what you want. You should try to understand people the way they are because people are unique. You should try to put yourself in their position and try to look at things from their perspective rather than judging everybody based on your own view of the world. So I think that's a pretty shitty advice. And the idea of separation of church and state coming from Jesus saying give to Caesar what Caesar is due, that's also bullshit because Jesus was a rebel against the order at that time, right? He was against established religion, and he also went into where people were doing business, peacefully doing business, and he started turning their tables around because he was against what? Like something that is not even a crime, right? Like what were they doing there, right? So I don't know. I don't think that I don't think that the argument that separation of church and state matters. He went to the temple, right? And he started turning around tables, and he started like people. This is a maniac, I think. The guy. I mean, so yeah, no. I think one thing I tell people is that if Muhammad and Jesus were both historical figures, right? And Muhammad seems to be way more likely than Jesus, but a lot of scholars think that Jesus was also historical, but the stories are probably not accurate.
Well, I think most biblical scholars, the consensus is like that he was a real guy, but like the gospel stories are bullshit. Basically.
Yeah, so that's the common consensus. Yeah, that's the most common. I mean, we have to. I just use Occam's razor based on people that are scholars because I don't know how to evaluate that myself, right? But unless I spend a bunch of time. But anyways, the thing is that even if the stories are like half true, it seems like the main difference between Jesus and Muhammad is that they were both rebels against the established religion at their time. But Muhammad led a successful rebellion, and Jesus led an unsuccessful rebellion, and he got crucified, right? If you read that first half of the Quran, which was before Muhammad coming to power, it seems a lot more peaceful than the second half when he did go to power. So I always wonder, that what if Jesus' rebellion was successful? Um, and then, like, even though the New Testament does have some barbaric shit in it, but maybe he would have changed his tune just like Muhammad did once he came to power. I don't know. But there are some things in the live chat. Moose Gal is asking, how did your guest? Wait, it went. How did your? Where is that? Where did it go? Oh no! First, there's a question before that. Theo, that's why free thought flourished in Greece and Rome. They had no scripture to keep the communal mind rigid. Yeah, and actually, religions before the Abrahamic religion didn't have to do much with morality. It had something to. The gods were half of their gods were assholes, and they admitted that our gods are assholes. They're just these asshole dudes that you have to get sacrifices to so that things go right. They didn't really care about how you live. So morality and ethics wasn't part of religion until Abrahamic religions, right? Muscal is asking, how did your guest get interested in Enlightenment? How did you get interested in?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
How did you get interested in the Enlightenment?
Oh, well, because I love history, and I'm not sure how I first got into the Enlightenment. It's kind of like a connection of like my non-belief and disdain for religion and my love for history. It's kind of like where it intersects, right? Because has so much to do with like where religion got dethroned in a big way, and where our like modern secular values come from. And it's just an interesting time too. I mean, it's if there was one period in history, I guess if I had to choose, I'd choose that time. I'd choose maybe like, I don't know, 1770s, France.
You wouldn't live long though.
Well, I would live longer than probably earlier times.
Yeah, but
so compared to today, yeah.
But not compared to now though. Theo is saying eye for an eye is usually called the reason for why all humans are equal. But there's no such thing as equality in the Bible. You have slaves, women, and non-believers are unequal. That's a good point.
Yeah, there's a quote from Paul that talks about like I forget the book, but it talks about like everybody's equal under Christ. But he talks about Christians are Christians in the life to come. Only Christians. Everybody else going to hell, right? So and he also says in this life you should stay in your station, right?
Do not mix with yoke, like something about yokes don't mixing something.
Yeah, I mean, apparently like half the epistles of Paul are forgeries and they're not really Paul's, but you know, you can find so much misogyny in there. Like, you know, 1 Timothy 2 talks about, you know, like women were the ones that sinned and they were the ones that ate the apple. And they're the ones that will be saved through childbirth only, but they can't hold authority over men.
And they should learn in silence. They should not be speaking.
Yeah. And they should cover their heads too, according to Paul.
Really?
And Christianity, at least in church. I forget the passage. I think Corinthians somewhere.
Oh, really? I didn't. I read the Bible. I messed up.
Probably Google that.
Theo is saying separation and church from state. Separation of church and state came from free thinkers sick of Christian authority. If Christianity came from, if I think he's saying if it came from Christianity, we would have seen these accomplishments in the fourth century. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. If separation of church and state came from Christianity, why didn't it not happen until the Enlightenment movement?
In ancient Rome, like, and there's some bad stuff in ancient Rome, right? But they had a lot of freedom of thought and religion.
Yeah, somebody pointed that actually.
Yeah.
There was. I mean, even Socrates was forced to take the poison when he said something against as long as
he was accused of atheism and rejecting the gods of the state and corrupting the youth.
So
because he was telling people to like to think and to question, and
so it wasn't that free.
He also thought he had a personal demon to talk to him. You know, they were back to, you know, there's some crazy ideas.
Yeah.
even from the good ones.
Actually, that's
But yeah,
interesting. It's interesting that we have so many examples of thinkers questioning gods without evolution. So it does challenge Richard Dawkins' idea that without Darwin, you wouldn't have atheists. I mean, the only thing you need, you don't need evolution to be an atheist. The only thing you need to know is, the only thing you need to have is to be like, how do we know? How do you know this is real?
and there were ideas about evolution before Darwin.
Oh yeah.
I think I read in some of the Hobach's work and others that another one was La Metière. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name
Lamarck?
right. And another one named Helvetus. And there was some like proto evolution
what time are we talking about?
In the Enlightenment, like in around France in the late 1700s, like 1770s and 1790s. Yeah, there were some ideas out there, definitely. I think going back to ancient Greece, you can find some of those ideas.
Somebody is asking, why do Christians condemn Islam when Christianity is also violent and it oppresses women? Well, I think Islam does it a little bit more directly and more clearly than Christianity. I mean, the Bible is kind of like all over the place. And I think the reason behind that is because it was written by way more number of people over a longer period of time. I mean, the Quran was.
I think you would know more about the Islam part of it than I would. I've actually read your book.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I thought it was really good.
Oh, thanks.
I guess I bought it maybe a year ago. I don't remember. But yeah, I remember it was good. It was a nice short little book that I really liked.
Yeah, you know, the title says, Why There Is No God, Simple Responses to 20 Common Questions about the common arguments for the existence of God. And then the main complaint I get was, why was it so short? I was like, because it says simple, like the whole purpose. That's the point, right? Because it's supposed to be a short book. Hillary is saying, isn't evolution a fact? Yeah, it is a fact. Theo is saying there's a good book on ancient atheism called Battling the Gods by Tim Whitmarsh. Oh, okay.
I got that book.
Oh, you have?
I have that book. Yeah.
It's a good book?
Yeah.
Wow, I should read that book. That sounds good. Awesome. Okay, so yes, somebody said that they might give it a try. Yeah, atheism, it makes sense even without evolution. All you have to claim is like, I can't believe in things without evidence, right? You don't need evolution to be able to say that.
I think science is pretty strongly like vindicated the thinkers of the past that were that doubted.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I think science encourages people to maybe think that maybe they're right. Maybe I shouldn't just assume things without evidence. I mean, when I first started thinking, it was kind of considering it was a little bit of history, but also in school when they told us about the primordial soup, that was like a huge moment for me as well, because I was like, this seems like everything can be explained, even things that we don't know. There might be an explanation for it, right? Like it seems like we don't need because actually the Miller experiment was a big deal for me, because so first they said here's evolution, okay, so we know now where other animals came from, and then they said the primordial soup. I'm like, okay, well, you can't just get organic stuff for non-organic stuff. And then I saw the Miller experiment. I like, okay, then there's probably nothing that there's not an explanation for. Even if we don't know the explanation for it, there's probably an explanation for everything else. Why do we need God anymore? Hello is saying, honestly, if evolution is fact, then that just shits on all religions, not on deism. You don't need evolution. The thing is that with deism, for example, again, all you need is, I can't believe in things without evidence, right? That's all you need. You don't need evolution. This is why a lot of people that don't even the danger between a lot of people are not scientists and don't have time to learn about science. People have lives, right? The people like you, like the fact that you have the luxury of time to be able to read and spend time on things. This is not how most people are. Here's what I tell you.
Or through history, most people through history, we hear like a few voices from like so many more that never had even the time to contemplate things like, I mean, for most of history, what humanity did is they worried about how to eat,
Right.
right? About survival.
No,
So,
but
I mean,
you know, I was in Manila in the Philippines, and I don't know what happened, but me and the taxi driver started talking about religion. I think the Pope came into discussion, and at one point he said atheists are idiots because if we came from monkeys, how come there's still monkeys out there, right? He actually. Yeah, he said, before I heard this from the taxi driver, I used to think that was like a meme of just like it's not actually an argument, but it was just making fun of creationists. But then I heard it in a random place on the other side of the planet from a taxi driver, like, oh my god, this is actually an argument from people. But then I thought to myself, I thought to my head, like, I'm not gonna explain evolution to you. Just go read the fucking science book, right? But then I also thought to myself that I started thinking, really, Armin, do you expect this guy to stop being a taxi driver and stop making money for himself and his family and go pick up a science book and start reading about evolution? Why would he do that?
Well, he could though, right?
But why?
He could find in a couple of hours, right?
But why?
Really?
Why would he do that? Like, why would he do that? I'm just saying, like, first of all, even the fact that me and you might have the motivation, we were raised maybe in a family that valued knowledge, or we have, but like inherently born with those traits, or we will grow around people that were interested in those topics, or we became interested in those topics. And also we have the luxury of time. We have what we're doing requires us to read and learn. A lot of people don't have the time, don't even know where to start, don't even even though there is a lot of information out there, they don't have the tools to recognize which ones are bullshit and which ones are not. And I thought, like, it might be too much to expect this from most people, right? And I thought, like, we can't just expect people to become more educated or wisen up, because if that's the expectation, then we're going to be waiting for a long time, and it's just not going to happen. And we have to find ways to reach out to these people in other ways. We have to make it as simple as possible. I mean, it's just not going to happen. You're not going to get a lot of these people caring, and even if you manage to get them caring, you're never going to get them to a level. It's too late, right? This guy has other priorities in his life, right? And rightfully so. Yeah. So yeah, but that's a different discussion with regards to what tactics we could use. But anyways, I think we went on for a while. Moose Gal is saying we don't need evolution. No, we do need evolution. What I'm saying is that even without evolution as an argument, there is a case for atheism. That's what my point. I'm not saying we don't. Of course, we need evolution. There's a lot of the medicine, a lot of.
It's a powerful point in its favor, no doubt.
What?
Evolution is a powerful point in the favor.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that because Darwin is responsible for a lot of atheists. Okay, but I'm just saying that there's arguments to be made for. I mean, the only thing you need for atheism is, where's your evidence? Okay, if you don't have any evidence for God, I'm not going to believe in it, even if I don't have evolution as a way to explain natural life. Just because I don't have the explanation, that doesn't mean your God is real. And you're right. A lot of the greatest thinkers of that before Darwin were deists. So you're right that evolution, a lot of these deists might have been atheists if they were born after Darwin. So Theo is actually, I think, is pointing that out. But I don't want to keep going. There's more comments. My mother used to say, Moose Gauss is saying, my mother is saying, if something is important to you, you'll make the time. Yeah, but why would that be important to them? They have other priorities. Yeah, I mean, anyway, the fact that you have a mother like that shows that you were lucky enough to be born in a family to provide you with such values, right? I mean, even the idea that you need evidence before believing in something just flies over people's heads. Here's what I say: intelligence and knowledge, which are completely separate things, are not very common. Okay, and we have to accept that. But one thing that is common is sympathy. Sympathy, sense of sympathy and kindness is a very common trait, even among the least intelligent of us. So lack of intelligence or lack of knowledge are things that I can forgive. This is, the book I wrote focuses on logical arguments, but when I talk to most theists that are not ever going to go pick up a book and read about these things, what I found out that bringing up logical fallacies, and I don't name logical fallacies, I explain to them. Like if I tell them like this is why this is a circular argument, and I go through examples with them, that's a lot of times that doesn't work. A lot of times when I tell them, well, how could you believe in something without evidence? That just doesn't, I talk to too many people, and a lot of people that are listening to this, I think their expectations from their fellow human beings is a lot because they hang out with other people that care about the stuff that they care about. And I think your understanding of how intelligent, you might think you know how stupid people are, but I think it's actually lower than what you think on average. And I forgive them for that. But what I tell you, when these arguments don't work, an argument that does work, for example, is this. I tell people, would it be fair, let's say there is a God and I'm wrong that there is no God. Do you think it's fair for me to burn forever because of that? And that they get that works a lot of times, because even if they don't have understanding of how logical fallacies work, even if they haven't studied biology or history or any of that, a sense of fairness, a sense of sympathy, a sense of kindness, that's something that is common, even if intelligence and knowledge is not common. And I think appealing to people's sense of sympathy in these situations usually it's a way to reach out to these people, because we can't just abandon people. Most of the planet is not very smart, and we can't just abandon these people. This planet can't just be only for intelligent people, okay? This planet has to work for all of us. And I think we have to find ways to reach out to people that haven't been as lucky as we have been.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. I'm gonna have to go here in a little bit.
Me too.
10 minutes or so. You were just talking about basic human decency. I have another quote here by de Holbach that I think is pretty good. If you want me to see it. Okay. This is from Good Sense in 1772. It says, whether there exists a God or not, whether this God is spoken or not, the moral duties of men will be always the same, so long as they are sensible beings. There is no vice which, by the nature of things, does not punish itself. Have men then need of a God whom they know not, of an invisible legislator, of a mysterious religion, and of chimerical fears, in order to learn that every excess evidently tends to destroy them, that to preserve health they must be temperate, that to gain the love of others it is necessary to do them good, that to do them evil is a sure means to incur their vengeance and hatred. It suffices that man needs his fellow creature in order to know that he must fear to excite sentiments unfavorable to himself. Thus, the feeling and thinking being has only to feel and think in order to discover what he must do for himself and others. I feel and another feels like me. This is the foundation of all morals. Never let us forget that the temple of happiness can only be reached through the groves of virtue, which surround it on every side, that the paths which lead to these beautiful walks can only be entered by the road of experience.
Awesome. I think that's a good place to end it. We've been going for about about almost under 2 hours, which is good.
Awesome.
Yeah, but this is good. So can you send me a link to, I think that people ask for two links. Send me a link to your book for me to put in the description.
People can also, I just now opened up a YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah. Can you give me a link to that as well? But there was something in the live chat somebody mentioned that they want a link to. I forgot what it was.
Just to shoot it by you real quick on the podcast, the YouTube channel is called Foresight Paradigm, the letter 4,
Okay.
then SITE,
Okay.
then Paradigm, PARADIGM.
And the YouTube channel has the same name?
Yeah, that's the name. That's the name on my YouTube channel's name.
Okay.
Foresight
Okay,
Paradigm.
but you
And I
mentioned
can
there's
give you
also in a podcast form as well? It comes as a podcast as well? Does it come out as a podcast?
Yeah, I may do some podcasts. I'm just now finally starting to do some stuff.
Right. Well, talk to me regarding how, like, if you ever wanting to check something with me. Like, if you're doing YouTube, you could just extract the audio and do a podcast as well. You might as well reach, because a lot of people are driving and want to listen to it. You know, YouTube, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Or doing in the gym, or they're doing the dishes or vacuuming or whatever. And podcast is such a good.
Right.
Oh wow, we got a super chat. Thank you. Shane Zolan did $2 and saying thank you for being you and all you do. Oh, thank you. That's very sweet. I appreciate that. And thank you to our.
I mean, Atheist Republic is pretty awesome. I have to tell you. I'm a contributor, but I'm a fan too.
Oh, thank you.
So, and I love you. I love your logo too.
Yeah.
You know, the lion and the horse and I read about how you came up with that. That's nice.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I hope we can do more of this in the future on other topics. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Theo. Thank you, Muscal. Thank you, Bij, Bobby. Good night, all. Mike, hello, and Shane Zolan. Thank you so much for the super chat. That's very generous. Did we meet many? Oh, by the way, Bij is Barbara. I just learned that today. Gory and who else? Anyways. Sorry if I missed anyone. You guys are awesome. Oh, I think I missed nobody. What is this? Exponent. Yeah, you guys are awesome. Thank you.